Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Novak, and I am a teacher and a writer and a consultant. And I'm going to share with you a little bit about how I became all of those three things and what I do for work. And then at the very end, I'd love to hear a little bit about what you hope to do for work and how potentially my journey and my story has helped you to get to know yourself and your dreams a little bit better. So I'm so happy to be here with you today.
All right, Katie, so if you want to just jump right into today's presentation, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay, perfect. So I started off actually as a high school teacher. I taught English in high school, and I absolutely loved that. So I'll share a little bit about my journey to become a teacher. And on the right-hand side, when I think of being a teacher, I think of being in a classroom with middle schoolers and high schoolers, teaching them to fall in love with text and to figure out how to share their voice or their writing in a way that's really meaningful. And so I was in the classroom for 13 years as a teacher, and I took a long journey to become an educator because I went to college first at the University of New Hampshire, and I thought I wanted to be a doctor actually. So I was studying pre-med, and I had this dream that I was going to be a doctor until I did an internship and said, I don't love this very much because I love people. And in the internship I did, there was a lot of paperwork and you didn't spend a lot of time as a doctor with patients. Nurses get to do that. And that was amazing. But I thought, you know what, maybe I'll do something different. So I graduated from the University of New Hampshire, and then suddenly I had all of these options available to me because I had a bachelor's degree. I could get a master's degree in almost anything. And both of my parents were teachers. And so I said, you know what, maybe I'll study education. And when I was a student teacher in the classroom, I fell in love with it. I was in a high school in California, and I said, this is exactly what I want to do. So while I went to Chapman University, I learned to become a teacher. I completed my student teaching, and then I get to have my own classroom, which I loved so much. But I also loved learning and realized that I missed learning. So then I actually went back to school again to get my doctorate in education. And so I have a doctorate in curriculum and teaching. And I got that while I was still a 7th grade teacher, which was awesome. But then I started getting a little itchy where I wanted to do something else. I wanted my classroom to be bigger. So I became an administrator, and then I became an assistant superintendent of schools. And while I did that, I just wanted to share what I was doing and what I was learning. And so I started writing books and articles, and I started becoming what is called a consultant, where you help other people in your same field. And then I realized that I could do that full time. So I'm going to share a little bit about that evolution. So when I was a 7th grade teacher, I taught English and I loved to write. And I was just so impressed by what my students were able to do when we designed our lessons together. And that's something that I talk about all the time now. It's called Universal Design for Learning, where we were designing these amazing lessons where students get to choose how they wanted to learn and how they wanted to share with me that they were meeting standards. And so I started writing about that journey. And the first book that I wrote was called UDL Now, which stands for Universal Design for Learning. And I was so excited to have the opportunity to write this book because I had always wanted to be a writer. So when I was in middle school and high school, I would have notebooks of poems and stories. And everyone would always say, oh, you're never going to be a writer. Anyone who tells you that, do not listen to them. Because as I was teaching, I realized that I could share my experience, and I wasn't writing these amazing novels about golden retrievers playing on the beach, which is what I was hoping for, but it did allow me to share my voice. And it turns out that I had something to say because so many people read that book. And then publishers started asking me, would you write a book about what it looks like online? Or would you write a book at what it looks like internationally? Or would you write a book? And so I've now gotten to write 10 books. And the really cool thing is UDL in the cloud on the bottom. I wrote that with my dad because my dad was a college professor. So it was so cool to be able to write a book with my dad. And now UDL now is on its third edition. So it's so interesting because as I'm doing the work, I get to share what I'm trying and what the results are on my learners. And that has been really, really cool. So in addition to writing about my journey and teaching, I started going to conferences. And when I would go to conferences and present, which anyone can apply to present at a conference, people started saying, hey, could I hire you to come out and do that at my school district? And I was like, yeah, I think so. Because I actually didn't plan to become a consultant. And consultants are people who do a really great job at their own job, and then they get to support other people. So now I get to teach teachers in schools all around the world and share with them universal design. And I get to do really cool things like present at big conferences, and I get to do webinars. Like I'm super excited to share this small little blip with you right now. And that picture of me with no eyes, that was when I did a podcast. And they said, we're going to make an animation of you. And I said, where are my eyes? In my nose. But it was super fun. And one of the most exciting things I got invited to do was to present at the NASA annual conference to all of these brilliant astrophysicists about how to make science more accessible. So they have a project called Bringing the Universe to America's Classrooms. And so now I'm a consultant full-time, which means that I travel all around the world and I help people in schools and at conferences all over the place in designing better instruction so that learners get to choose again how they learn and the materials they use, and then how they get to share their learning. So it's a very, very fun role for me, and it continues to allow me to teach and to allow me to write. But now I get to do that all over the place. So I know that some people are watching here from all over the world, and maybe I will see you in person. But something really exciting that I've been able to do is because I work for myself, I have my own business and my own company, I get to decide what that business looks like. And a part of that for me was making things really fun for everyone who I worked with and to make sure every experience is a little bit different. So I actually started working with a professional DJ in Los Angeles a couple years ago. And every time I present virtually on Zoom, DJ Mr. Swift is with me, which is so much fun. So what we're going to do now is we're going to change the chat so you are able to share with us, and we're going to play a little bit of music. And if that music is distracting to you at all, you can just press mute because you have the choice to decide to listen to the music or not listen to the music. So we're going to give you 1 minute. And what I would love to know is like, what is your dream job? Now, I know that there might be some teachers here. I want to hear from you as well. Maybe you want to write a book, or maybe you want to teach in a different part of the world. There is never a time where we don't get to set goals for our future. So for you students, when you are 42 like me, what do you want to do? And if you're past 42, what do you want to do when you're 80 or 100? So 1 minute here for you to share your thoughts in the chat so I get to know a little bit more about you. Now, a lot of you sent me private messages and some of you sent me public messages, and I love that you knew that you had that option so you could make it work best for you. But a lot of people have these dreams of things that they want to accomplish, and just know that you can always continue working towards those things. So even though I didn't start off thinking I wanted to be a teacher, I knew that I wanted to work in a field that allowed me to spend a lot of time with people. And that's why I was hoping to be a doctor, as I wanted to spend time helping people. But then I realized I didn't get to spend as much time with people as I wanted to. And so my dream evolved. And when I was a teacher, I thought that was it. I was so happy being a teacher. I loved teaching middle school and high school. And I did that for 13 years. And then suddenly I got this kind of itchiness of, you know what? Maybe I want to do something else as well. So know that even if you have dreams, those dreams will continue to change. And some of you who are educators now sent me messages about how you'll continue to reach forward and dream big. So I got to share with you a little bit about myself, and I'm so happy that you got to share a little bit about your own dreams. But what I would love to do for this next 2 minutes is I want you to make a connection. I just told you a very brief story of how I've come to own a consulting company for education, and I get to write these books and work with students and teachers all around the world. But how does my own work relate to your dream job? So see if you can make a connection, even really small, between what I'm doing right now and ultimately what you want to do. And again, feel free to have a conversation if you're in a room with someone, or feel free to share in that chat for 2 minutes this time. There's so many people here who are similar to me, where it's like, I want to connect with people. I want to be able to have that interpersonal. Some of you just made connections just about the creativity of like writing or creating art or producing music. And so I love seeing all those connections. But what is most important is just knowing that things will continue to evolve, and what you right now want, go for that. But also know there's always opportunities to think differently and build on those skills and potentially move in a direction that you did not think that you would go in. Now, I didn't know if there were any questions. I heard that there were some questions sent via email, so I'm happy to answer a couple of them before we all go on with our beautiful days.
Absolutely. So we can get onto that. I know that some of the kids emailed questions. You guys can also message them in the chat. And one of the first questions was, who did you look up to when you were growing up, as far as like on your journey?
So both of my parents were teachers, and I always thought that what they did was really cool. And I used to volunteer in their classrooms all the time, but I didn't actually think that I wanted to be a teacher. But I was also so inspired by my meme, and that was my dad's mother. So my dad's mother never went to school after 3rd grade. So she grew up in a little town in Canada, and then there was this huge influenza outbreak, and a lot of her siblings got very, very sick. And she was sent to be an au pair, which is like a mother's helper, and never went to school again. And even though she was only educated until 3rd grade in a traditional sense, which is about 8 years old, she was one of the smartest, most brilliant people that I know. And I was always really, really impressed by the fact that you always get to decide what you're going to learn. And it is wonderful to have opportunities for schooling, but even after schooling, anyone can be a learner. And I just love that about her. And she was fierce, and she was strong, and she was incredibly educated, but in her own way. And so a part of me was always really driven by her. And she told me this story once where she worked at a factory and she had to take a bus. And this was like in the 1940s, so a very long time ago. And she missed the bus and was thinking, oh my goodness, I'm not going to get to work on time. And this is before Uber and cell phones, and there was no way to get a ride. So she says, I just took off my shoes and I ran in my pantyhose for 3 miles, and I wasn't late. I beat the bus. And she was just a really gritty woman. And I always looked up to that like, I will figure out a way to do this.
That is awesome. Persevering through adversity right there. Just total perseverance.
Yes.
We have a question from Liliana, and she actually requested for you to be a guest. And so Liliana you have the floor. You can meet Katie.
Hey, Katie, so nice to meet you. I am the National Director for Special Education and Student Support for Academica. So Academica supports over 210 charter schools in the United States. And then we also educate over 10,000 students internationally, virtually. So my assistant, Shari Barani, had heard you speak, and she's like, "Oh my God, Lily, please, can you bring her on?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, let's ask Ralph, because Ralph can bring anyone on." Ralph even got Temple Grandin last year for us. I know, like he's magical, right? He's very magical. So I know that I'm scrolling through the Zoom list here, and I see that there's a lot of our special ed teachers on. So I want to thank all the special ed teachers for coming on board. And I also want to thank all of the students. We have so many students on here today. So thank you guys for coming to the session. So Katie, my question for you from the teachers and the practitioners, what are you seeing are the greatest challenges when it comes to the inclusive movement now? And what do you recommend for all of these special educators to share with their administrators when it comes to the inclusion of students?
Okay, so the first thing is students with disabilities are not the property of a special education department. Students with disabilities are general education students who receive specially designed instruction. So that is the first thing. But when we talk about barriers, I generally talk about it as a stool with 3 legs, where we have these mindset barriers, we have skill set barriers, and then we have systems barriers. So your mindset are things like some students aren't capable of learning at high levels, which is false. Or as a general education teacher, it is not my role or responsibility to teach students who have some significant support needs. And so we really have to address people's belief systems about teaching all students, and also about asset-based mindsets, is that everyone can work towards mastery of grade level instruction given the right conditions. We just have to work together differently to put those conditions in place. So I talk a lot about belief systems. The skill set is knowing how to design a classroom that supports and challenges students who are very diverse and have very different needs, which is impossible with a one-size-fits-all approach to teaching and learning. And that's why it's so important to really think about embracing the variability of a class and knowing how to design with flexible options to meet the needs of students academically, behaviorally, socially and emotionally, linguistically, culturally, and I'm one person, which makes that really challenging if I don't co-create that with the learners and the families that I serve, as well as my colleagues. And that leads me to the systems issues, which is sometimes we don't have the systems that really allow people to co-plan and work together, or they don't have access to the high quality professional development that builds their skill set, or we don't have leaders who really intentionally try to deconstruct this responsibility is only for special education. And so looking at all 3 of those things, my lens is always, how do we shift our systems over time to build the skill sets of all educators to meet the needs of students? But also we have to be able to challenge mindsets, because every learner and every teacher is capable of success if we get those conditions right. And accepting anything less is adults making decisions for children that impact their future. And none of us have that power nor privilege, sorry.
No, you're good. We have a student question. This comes from Italy, and this is Mev. Mev, you had an awesome question. Go ahead and ask.
Thank you. Hi, nice to meet you.
Hi.
I would like to know something basic that you teach to educators that hasn't changed over the years.
Have very deep relationships with students. So ever since I started teaching, this was over 20 years ago, what has not changed is we have to get to know our children. We have to get to know our adults, anyone we're working with in education, because all learning is social and emotional. And we are much more likely to learn from people we have connected with. And so I think that throughout history, I think we've always talked about the importance of building those relationships, because then we can challenge and support people in ways that represent who they really are. And if we don't build relationships, we don't know who they really are.
Well said. Well said. And we're not going to take too much time. We have one more guest question, and then we'll let you go. So this is Lauren, and she is a student down in Florida. And Lauren, you should be able to unmute and ask your question.
Hello, nice to meet you. I'm studying at University of Florida right now. I'm an EDD student in Ed Tech, and my research area focus is universal design for learning. So I wanted to ask you, what gaps are you seeing currently, like in the research? And how can administrators support UDL implementation in the secondary and post-secondary context? That's kind of where I'm specializing right now. So it would be cool to listen to a practitioner point of view.
So one of the places that I think is a gap is the lack of evidence-based outcomes, because universal design for learning as a framework is huge. So it's about recognizing barriers and eliminating them. So it's very difficult to measure because there are so many strategies that need to be in place. And so a lot of people will look at, let's say, the evidence base of eliminating barriers to decoding by providing educational technology to support comprehension. And that's really specific. But then people will say, well, what about UDL as a whole? How do you measure that? And so I think there's a lot of people who are trying to create a way to actually measure universal design for learning, which I think would be a recognition of what barriers still exist in the classroom from the perception of learners, because the class is only universally designed if all learners are learning at high levels and feel as though they belong, and they're feeling that successful, like not only academically, but behaviorally and socially and emotionally. And so I think that it will be really important in the field to do more measurement of like learner perception of how a designer was able to eliminate barriers and then how that equated to their own success, because many of the studies only look at academic outcomes, sometimes using measures that are exclusionary by design. So if we're using a state standardized measure to, for instance, measure learning, and that measure is only done in English, and we serve students whose first language is in English, that's not a great measure of their learning. It's a great measure of their learning in English. So I think that trying to get a better sense of what is the impact of removing barriers to instruction, and then how does that equate not only to the outcomes for learners as in their grades and their assessment, but how they feel about themselves as learners. And I think that will be really important. And I think that will be looking at all of the things I talked about previously, which is people's mindsets. Do we think that teachers believe that we're capable of greatness? Is it skill set that the teacher knows how to recognize and eliminate barriers? But it's also the system needs to be responsible for lifting up educators so they can serve their learners. So I'm always getting asked, what's the research on its effectiveness? And my answer is, there's lots of research on components of universal design, but in the field, there hasn't yet been a great way to measure overall what it looks like when you eliminate all barriers to learning.
Well said. Well said. Good. Thank you. So our final question.
I actually have another presentation that's starting in 2 minutes. So I'm not sure I can do one more question.
No, we just wanted to know, what kind of advice would you give to these kids as they go off into the world and figure out what they want to do?
That you get to figure out what you want to do. I think that would be the most important thing. Is there's lots of people who will tell us what we should be doing, and there'll be a lot of people who tell you what you can't do. And if you can't surround yourself with people who tell you that you can do it, then go find more people, because I could absolutely make a huge list of all the people who told me, you know, teachers are never going to make a lot of money, or you're never going to get that book published, or, you know, consulting's really hard, you're never going to get clients. Oh, aren't you scared? And the answer is that I know what I am capable of. And I know that there is a pathway to get there. And if I haven't figured it out yet, I will. And so keep your dreams in front of you, surround yourself with people who lift you up and help you figure out another way to do it. Because I fail a lot. And when I do, I just say, well, that way didn't work. Let me find another way. And that's with the design of classrooms, and that's with my own personal goals as well.
That's wonderful advice. And before we let you go, before I end the meeting for all, can we all unmute and can we say thank you to Dr. Novak for spending her valuable time with us today?
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Amazing.